Hello everybody and welcome back to Odin's movie blog. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we've got some box office news to break down because, well, the box office is still not doing very well, but there are some numbers that have come out, and so I will try my very best to break them down and explain what they mean for the films that have so far been released. Obviously, in this age of COVID, it is very hard to really determine whether films have made their money back or are even close to making their money back, because normal standard indicators like how much a film typically would spend on things like marketing, how much share a film would have gotten from a theatrical release, all of these things are pretty much up in the air because many contracts that theaters tend to make with studios have kind of been changed in this age of PVOD, instant release the same day as films being released theatrically, or shorter theatrical windows where a film will be out for 2 weeks and then put out onto PVOD. Again, all these different deals kind of change the numbers, and a lot of these numbers are not really that well known, but we'll try our very best to break down what we have so far. But before we get into these numbers, please make sure you smash that like button and share this video with anyone that you think might enjoy box office breakdown and movie content. So starting off with Freaky, starring Vince Vaughn, still is leading the box office and really is not making enough at this point to make its money back, at the very least, just based on the theatrical numbers. We don't know exactly what the PVOD numbers, the actual raw numbers, will be for the film, so it very well could be closer to making its money back at this point, but just based on the box office numbers, not really that close at all. Also, Jackie Chan's new film, Vanguard, which looks pretty interesting. I do like Jackie Chan, especially in those action roles. Did not do very well in theaters, but again, just like with Freaky, could have done better on video on demand. So this is from Deadline. It says, the weekend before Thanksgiving is one of the most lucrative ones on the calendar. Last year, it brought in $204.9 million off the opening of Disney's Frozen 2, which posted November's 5th best domestic opening of all time. Who would ever think that the domestic box office would sink to such an atrocious level this weekend? If last weekend brought in $10 million for all titles with California theaters and other markets like Illinois open, this weekend is surely the lowest weekend for an exhibition since theaters reopened back in September for Tenet, with an estimated $6.5 million total, a 35% drop. And this makes a lot of sense because it's interesting how they mention, oh, well, California theaters and Illinois theaters are opening back up. But then over the past week, what have we seen? A lot of states have now tried to put more places back on lockdown, have tried to push forward things like curfews. And remember, a lot of these theaters and these theater chains have already suffered so much from an economic standpoint that there have been many that have closed. So it makes complete sense to me as to why you have a 35% drop off, and also why, in comparison to last year's numbers, it's not just, and I think some people try and spin this a little bit too much, it's not just because we're in COVID, it's not just because people are afraid to go back into theaters, it's because economically this whole shutdown nonsense has been completely devastating to these various companies, and also because you have so many states with all these different regulations making it harder for people to go out to see to see movies at theaters, and also, of course, for studios to be basically ballsy enough to put out their big tentpole items and instead are holding off until next year. But let's just be honest, will theaters even be around next year at this point and at this rate? I doubt it, though there has been some slightly good news depending on how you look at it when it comes to Regal cinemas that we'll get to just a little bit later. At that level, how can a circuit like AMC, which has an estimated weekly burn rate of $25 million, stay open? Meaning that it spends around $25 million every week, which means that if all theaters across the country only brought in $6.5 million, they are burning through cash. This kind of reminds me of a little company called MoviePass back in the day. I shut down on, what was it, last year, 2 years ago at this point. Kind of turned into a scam towards the very end especially, but it was making so little money in comparison to the amount of money that was being spent that it just became a point where everyone was just looking at the writing on the wall, knowing that it was going to close. I'm basically in the same position right now when I look at AMC and Regal Cinemas. There was only one other wide release this past weekend, Jackie Chan's Vanguard, and it wasn't from a major studio. Again, that I think is another huge impact onto why studios, or rather why theaters, are not making a whole lot of money right now. Rather, Gravitas Ventures, a distributor known for its theatrical day and date PVOD release titles, the movie fizzled in the number 7 spot with a reported $400,000 at 1,375 theaters in 178 markets in what I'm told is a 90-day theatrical window. 90 days. They expect that movie to be out in theaters for 3 months, and it only made $400,000 in its opening weekend. That is not good. That is not good at all. That is downright atrocious, and that doesn't mean that the movie's bad. It just means that that is the current state of the market as we see right now. It says here Vanguard's most notable numbers were in the West and the South. Makes kind of sense there. But of course, they weren't very strong. Critics hated the movie at 29%, but post-track audiences were a bit more positive at 72% and a 57% recommend, which makes a lot more sense to me because it tends to be the case whenever critics hate a film, it's probably a good time. It's probably a lot of fun. And when I look at a Jackie Chan movie, and the last film that I saw him in was The Foreigner, which was a fantastic movie, you know what? I'm willing to give him and his film the benefit of the doubt. And so I will try my best to see that at some point. But of course, I can't really leave my house right now because of all the crazy stuff going on with the lockdowns. And also, of course, because Baby Thor is here. And we got to obviously take care of Baby Thor until he's a little bit older, is able to fight off any illnesses that I might break home, like just the common cold, for instance. But there is seemingly some good news on the horizon, and that has to do with what's coming out of Cineworld, which is the owner of Regal Cinemas here in the United States. Cineworld has secured over $450 million in debt facility. New measures generate over $750 million in extra liquidity for Regal owner. Sounds like great news, right? Millions upon millions of dollars. However, if we go back to this article right here where it says that AMC alone is burning through $25 million just to stay open, I imagine that Regal, having closed all their theaters, the question then is how much money are they burning through? Because they're probably still having to pay property taxes. They're probably still having to pay just general upkeep, because even if you're not showing actual movies, you got to keep things on to a certain extent. You got to keep your servers on to a certain extent, which means it's going to cost some money, right? If a building's just sitting there and you are planning to reopen it, you're going to have some of that energy on, which means you're spending money on those wide variety of screens. And so is that going to be enough, especially since this is not just for the United States market, but for the entire Cineworld market, which includes other countries even? Is it going to be enough? I honestly, at this point, don't really know. In a major sign of confidence in the future of theatrical moviegoing, I doubt it. The world's second largest exhibitor and owner of Regal in the United States, Cineworld Group, has secured significant additional liquidity that will help ensure its future despite ongoing challenges created by the COVID pandemic. Again, here's the interesting thing is that it's always going to be blamed on COVID and not on the shutdowns. It's not going to be blamed on governors. It's not going to be blamed on governments shutting down the economy and destroying the economy. Again, I understand that we're in the midst of a pandemic. I understand that there have been a lot of people whose lives have been lost and lives have been impacted by this. But please do not for a second try and blame this on a virus when the reason why theaters especially are in this position are because of overstepping of the bounds of, by different governments and by different people, forcing these companies to shut down, forcing these businesses to close, and no matter what you promise them, and no matter what kind of liquidity you give them, or what kind of bailouts you promise them, it's not going to be enough. We've already seen too many small and local businesses have to shut down permanently just in my local area. More and more businesses are announcing that they're closing for the first time in years and are shutting down completely in many of those cases. I doubt that a giant corporation, even like the likes of Regal or AMC, are going to be able to handle that even with this money being given to them or being acquired by them because of all this nonsense that happened to be going on. It says here, also set out today are plans for the issue of equity warrants, the waiver of all bank financials covenants until June 2022, extended maturity of its $111 million incremental revolving credit facility from December 2020. All of that is jargon to me. However, basically what it sounds like is that they're trying to give the theaters a little bit of headroom, a little bit of room to be able to use the money in the best way possible, to be able to make money, return on that investment. But as I said, doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon. And one of the best case in points is the fact that big movies set to come out this year are not coming out this year. The only big film that has come out really this year, the only major release, giant $200+ million production budget that's come out over the past few months has been the movie Tenet, which made $356 million worldwide. And I think that's a lot more than what a lot of people thought it was going to make. The problem is that the film cost $205 million to make, meaning that if you actually take into account, again, these are just theatrical numbers at this point, but if you take those numbers into account, And normally studios only have about 60% or keep 60% of entire box office revenue. It means Tenet has only actually made $213.8 million. Some would say, well, that's more than the production budget. Isn't that a good thing? Why say nay, nay? Because remember, they also have to spend money on marketing. And because a lot of their marketing has been spent prior to COVID, prior to a lot of the shutdowns, because they were assuming that things would be fine and reopened by the fall of this year, they're probably having a production budget, or rather a marketing budget, that is similar to years past with other major films, which means you have to add on essentially another $100 million or so, which means that the movie is still about $90 million or so in the red, in debt. And that's not going to be made up, at least theatrically, at this point in time. Obviously, the 4K title has been released, or has been announced for release. Blu-ray has been announced for release as well, so we could potentially see some of that money be made up, because they will keep a lot more of that money when you look at just the return on the investment per disc sold. But are they going to be able to make $90 to $100 million in profit? If they do, it'll probably be a while, because even though you have a lot of people at home, even though you have a lot of people that are not able to go out to these studios, or rather go out to these theaters anymore, what you find is that still, even on PVOD side of it, not a lot of people are consuming content or wanting to pay to consume content, which in some ways could be a good thing. In some ways you could say, hey, that means that they're saying, hey, we're not going to take your crappy content anymore. But then I think about films like Tenet, which I personally was a big fan of, and these films are also therefore kind of getting hurt in the crossfire as well. So with all that being said, do you think that we're going to see any light? Because even if you look at this and say, oh, this is good news, or you look at the fact that AMC was also in a position where they were able to create more liquid money for themselves, when you take into account all these other things like Freaky not making a whole lot of money, again, that movie has made $9 million or so worldwide. It cost around $10 million to make, which means that film also, even at a lower budget film, hasn't made its money back yet, at least when you just look at theatrical numbers. So you look at all these different things, you take all of these different things into account, and it just seems that the walls are closing in on movie theaters. And these are not just the giant corporations, these are even the local theaters. This does not mean that every local theater is going to close, but it does mean a huge portion of them are going to be negatively impacted. Because if even the giant corporate theater chains can't stay open, or having to be given $450 million, and are not going to be able to utilize that in a way because they're burning through, as it says right here, $25 million a week, I don't know. Anyway, what are your thoughts about this? Let me know in the comment section below. If you like this video, smash that like button, hit that subscribe. It helps out a lot. You are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my November Patreon and Subscribe Star members: Albertus Magnus, Animation Commentator, Brian P., David Bobrizik, Dion, Divex, Enrique Evangelista, Father Christopher Miller, Hail Father, Father Damian Cook, Frank the Tank and the Shawhan Wiener Dog Clan, Harold Francis, the Hunky Chunky Funky Monkey, Inflamed Wood, It's a Trap Productions, Jason Clark, Jacob Juice, Jay, Jeffrey Toon, Jonathan Carney, Kenneth Camille, Laura Story ×2, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mike Jackson, Mr. Peabody and his evil twin, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Outpost Dyer, Riff Magos, Rosetta Allen, Steve Glasker, Teresa Martin, or Miss Martin Muses, Theodore Bendon, Tina Bojan, and Tina B., the Empress of the Universe. Thank you all for being my Patreon members, and a shout out, of course, to my Subscribe Star members: Stand For, John B., Perpetual Punster, Robert Revo, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, Darkstar 57, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., US 888209 Fast, Dean Heiss, J. Rod the Beer Guru, Nabadan G. Adams, and ZK Man. Thank you to my Subscribe Star and Patreon members for supporting me for this month. I hope that you are enjoying your perks of getting access to things like a podcast, to giveaways, and also, of course, to other exclusive content. I know I've fallen a little bit behind with the birth of Baby Thor, and so I thank you very much for your patience and, of course, for your continued support. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful day, and as always, God bless.